Emily Carter was a dedicated nurse who had spent years working at St. Mary's Hospital. She loved her job because it allowed her to help people in their most vulnerable moments. Every day she worked long hours, often skipping breaks just to make sure her patients were comfortable and receiving the best care possible. Despite the stress and exhaustion, she never complained. Helping others gave her purpose. One evening, as she was about to end her shift, the hospital doors burst open. A group of paramedics rushed in with a man on a stretcher. He was unconscious, barely breathing, and his skin was pale. His clothes were expensive, and he looked like someone important, but none of that mattered to Emily. To her, he was just another patient in need of urgent help. A doctor glanced at the man's chart and hesitated. The hospital had strict policies about patient admission and required specific paperwork before treatment could begin, especially in non-emergency cases. But Emily knew right away that this was a life-threatening situation. There was no time to waste. She could see that his pulse was weak, and every second counted. Ignoring the hesitation of the staff around her, Emily jumped into action. She quickly prepared the necessary medical equipment and started working to stabilize him. She administered oxygen, checked his vitals, and gave the required medication. Other nurses followed her lead, and soon the ER was filled with the sounds of beeping machines and urgent whispers. The doctor on duty finally stepped in, realizing the seriousness of the situation. He ordered additional tests and procedures. Emily worked tirelessly, her hands steady as she adjusted the man's IV and monitored his condition. Minutes felt like hours, but slowly, the patient's breathing became more stable. His heartbeat grew stronger. A few moments later, the man's eyes fluttered open. He looked around, confused but alive. His gaze met Emily's, and though he couldn't speak yet, the gratitude in his eyes was clear. Emily let out a quiet sigh of relief. She had done her job. She had saved a life. As the man was moved to a private recovery room, Emily finally allowed herself to sit down for a moment. She was exhausted, but a small smile played on her lips. This was why she became a nurse: to make a difference, to save lives, to be there when no one else could. But as she looked around, she noticed some of the hospital administrators whispering among themselves. Their expressions were serious, and they kept glancing in her direction. A strange feeling settled in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. Right now, all that mattered was that her patient was safe. Little did she know, her act of kindness would soon lead to consequences she never expected. The next morning, Emily walked into the hospital feeling proud of what she had done the night before. Saving a life had always been her top priority, and she didn't regret a single decision she had made. As she made her way through the hallway, a few nurses smiled at her, whispering about how she had acted bravely in the emergency room. She felt a small sense of relief. Maybe everything would be fine. But that feeling didn't last long. As soon as she reached the nurse's station, she was called into the hospital administrator's office. The tone was formal, almost cold. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she walked inside, finding herself face to face with 3 senior hospital officials. Their expressions were serious, and she could already tell that something was wrong. One of the administrators, Mr. Clarkson, adjusted his glasses and looked at her with a firm expression. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Emily, we need to talk about what happened last night." Emily nodded, folding her hands together. "Yes, of course. I understand it was a critical situation, and I did what I had to do to save the patient's life." There was a moment of silence. Then another administrator, Mrs. Reynolds, shook her head. "That's the problem, Emily. You acted without authorization. The hospital has strict rules, and every employee must follow them. You bypassed protocol, and that cannot be ignored." Emily blinked, confused. But if I had waited for approval, the patient might not have made it. She looked at them, hoping they would understand. "I didn't have a choice." Mr. Clarkson sighed, tapping his fingers on the table. "We understand your intentions, but rules are rules. If every staff member starts making decisions on their own, It could create chaos. Emily felt a lump in her throat. Was this really happening? Instead of being praised for saving a life, she was being questioned like she had done something wrong. Then came the words she never expected to hear. "Emily, we have decided to let you go. Effective immediately." Her heart dropped. "You're firing me." Mrs. Reynolds gave a small nod. "We appreciate your service to this hospital, but we can't overlook this. We will process your paperwork, and you can collect your things." Emily sat there, stunned. She had worked at this hospital for years. She had dedicated her life to her patients. And now, just like that, it was over. She walked out of the office in a daze. Her colleagues stared at her in shock as she packed up her belongings. Some whispered in disbelief. Others looked away, unsure of what to say. As she stepped outside, a cold breeze hit her face. She had no idea what she would do next. But one thing was certain. Her life had just taken a drastic turn. Emily walked home in a daze, her mind still struggling to process what had just happened. She had spent years dedicating herself to that hospital, working tirelessly to save lives. Yet in a matter of minutes, she had been dismissed like she meant nothing. Every step she took felt heavy, and the weight of uncertainty pressed down on her. How would she pay her bills? How would she take care of herself? As she reached her small house, she took a deep breath before stepping inside. The familiar warmth of her home gave her little comfort. She placed her bag down on the kitchen table and sank into a chair, staring blankly at the wall. Her thoughts raced in 1,000 directions. Was there something she could have said to change their minds? Was there a way to fix this? Before she could dwell on it any longer, she heard the distant sound of engines rumbling outside. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was just traffic passing by. But then, the sound grew louder, and soon bright headlights flashed through her window. Confused, Emily stood up and walked toward the door. She hesitated for a moment before pulling the curtain aside to take a look. Her eyes widened in shock. Outside, a line of luxury cars had pulled up in front of her house. These weren't just any cars. They were sleek, expensive models, the kind she had only ever seen in magazines or on television. The engines turned off one by one, and the doors swung open. Well-dressed men stepped out, their movements precise and purposeful. Emily's heart pounded. Who were these people? And why were they at her house? Before she could react, there was a firm knock at her door. She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the doorknob. As she opened the door, she found herself face to face with a tall man in a sharp black suit. He had a strong presence, and though his expression was serious, there was warmth in his eyes. "Miss Carter?" he asked politely. Emily nodded cautiously. "Yes, that's me." The man gave a small smile. "We've been looking for you. There's someone who would like to meet you." Emily's brows furrowed in confusion. "Who?" At that moment, another figure stepped forward. He was older, well-groomed, and dressed in an expensive suit. His face looked familiar, and when their eyes met, Emily felt a jolt of recognition. It was the man she had saved at the hospital, the very man who had been unconscious just hours ago. She stared at him in disbelief. He was standing there, healthy and strong, as if nothing had happened. But why was he here? Before she could ask, the man smiled and said in a calm, grateful voice, "We need to talk." Emily stood frozen in her doorway, her mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. Just hours ago, she had been fired from the hospital, feeling lost and defeated. And now the man whose life she had saved was standing in front of her, looking strong and healthy. His eyes held a warmth that made her feel both nervous and curious at the same time. The man stepped forward, offering his hand. "Miss Carter, my name is James Reynolds," he said with a kind smile. "I don't think we were properly introduced at the hospital." Emily hesitated before shaking his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, and she could tell from the way he looked at her that he truly appreciated what she had done for him. I don't understand, she said, glancing at the luxurious cars parked outside her modest home. Why are you here? James exchanged a glance with the man in the black suit, who gave a small nod before stepping back. James then turned his attention fully to Emily. I owe you my life, he said sincerely. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be standing here right now. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had saved many lives before, but no one had ever come back to thank her like this. Most patients left the hospital and moved on with their lives, which was exactly what she wanted for them. But James was different. He had come to find her. I was shocked when I heard what happened to you, he continued. The hospital should have rewarded you, not punished you. Firing you was a terrible mistake. Emily looked down, still feeling the pain of losing her job. I was just doing what I was supposed to do, she said softly. I couldn't just stand there and watch you suffer. James smiled again, but this time there was something else in his expression, determination. That's exactly why I'm here, he said. I believe people like you deserve better, and I want to help. Emily frowned slightly. Help? How? James gestured toward his car. Would you be willing to take a short drive with me? I promise, this will change your life. Emily hesitated. She had no reason to distrust him. But everything was happening so fast. Still, something inside her told her to take the chance. After a moment, she gave a small nod. All right, she said. James's smile widened. Good. Let's go. As she stepped into the luxurious car, Emily couldn't help but wonder where this journey would take her. Just hours ago, she thought her career was over. But now, for the first time since losing her job, she felt a spark of hope. Emily sat in the back seat of the luxurious car, feeling slightly nervous but also curious. The soft leather seats and the smooth ride made it clear that this was no ordinary vehicle. She glanced at James, who sat beside her, looking calm and confident. The driver focused on the road ahead as they moved through the city streets. For a few moments, there was silence. Then, James turned to her. I know this is all very sudden, he said, but I want you to know that I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the hospital. Emily nodded slowly, still unsure where this conversation was leading. I just did what any nurse would do, she replied. James shook his head. No, you didn't. You did what a true healer does. You saw a person in need, and you acted, without worrying about rules or consequences. You saved my life when others hesitated. That's rare. Emily felt a small warmth in her chest at his words. It wasn't often that someone recognized the sacrifices she made. James continued, his voice filled with sincerity. After I was discharged, I looked into your situation. When I heard that you had been fired, I was furious. The hospital should have honored you, not punished you. Emily let out a sigh. Hospitals have rules, she said. I broke them. That's how they saw it. James smiled slightly. Well, I don't care about their rules. I care about people who make a real difference. That's why I wanted to see you. The car slowed as they approached a grand building. Emily's eyes widened as she saw the name displayed on the front, Reynolds Medical Foundation. The name was familiar. She had heard about it before. It was a highly respected organization that worked to improve healthcare. Emily walked through the grand halls of the Reynolds Medical Foundation, still trying to believe that this was real. Just a day ago, she had been fired from the hospital, unsure of what her future would hold. Now she was standing in one of the most respected medical organizations in the country, being offered a chance to make a real difference. James led her through the modern, beautifully designed building, introducing her to doctors, researchers, and healthcare experts. Everyone greeted her warmly, treating her with a level of respect she had never experienced before. It was clear that this place was different from the hospital she had worked at. Here, people cared more about saving lives than about following rigid rules. As they walked into a large meeting room, James gestured for her to take a seat. Emily, he said, sitting across from her, I want you to feel at home here. You don't have to worry about strict policies that punish good decisions. What you did at the hospital, that's the kind of quick thinking we need. Emily listened carefully, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. But I've never worked outside of a hospital before, she admitted. I don't know how things work in a place like this. James smiled. You don't have to. We'll figure it out together. I want you to use your experience and skills to help improve emergency response systems. You know firsthand what happens when Emily's days at the Reynolds Medical Foundation were filled with purpose and excitement. Every morning, she woke up feeling eager to work, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Instead of being restricted by hospital rules, she was now creating programs that could save lives across the country. She spent hours researching, meeting with doctors, and speaking with nurses who had faced similar struggles. Many of them shared heartbreaking stories about losing patients because of unnecessary delays. Some had even left the profession, feeling frustrated by a system that prioritized paperwork over human lives. Determined to bring change, Emily worked even harder. She and her team designed a new emergency response system, one that allowed medical professionals to make fast decisions in life-threatening situations. The program included specialized training, legal protections for nurses and doctors, and new hospital policies that encouraged quick action. One afternoon, as Emily was reviewing a document, James walked into her office with a proud smile. Emily, you need to see this, he said, handing her a report. She took it and quickly scanned the pages. Her heart pounded as she read the details. Several hospitals had already started using her program, and the results were astonishing. Patient survival rates had improved, and doctors and nurses reported feeling more confident in emergencies. This is incredible, she whispered, barely able to believe it. James nodded. You've done something amazing, Emily. You didn't just save my life. You're now saving countless others. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. She had always wanted to make a difference, but she never imagined she would have this kind of impact. That evening, James invited her to a special event at the foundation. When she arrived, she was surprised to see a large gathering of people, doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, and even former patients. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and appreciation. James stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. Tonight, we are here to celebrate someone truly special, he announced. Emily Carter didn't just save my life. She is changing the future of emergency medicine. The crowd erupted into applause, and Emily felt her face grow warm. She had never been the center of attention before, but at this moment, she wasn't nervous. She was proud. James continued, Emily, your work has inspired hospitals to rethink their policies, and because of your dedication, we are launching the Carter Initiative, a nationwide program that will train and support medical professionals in making life-saving decisions without fear. Emily gasped. She had no idea that her work had led to something this big. She looked at James, who smiled and nodded at her. As the audience applauded again, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had once thought losing her hospital job was the worst thing that had ever happened to her. But now she realized it had been the best thing. As Emily stood on the stage, overwhelmed by the applause, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Just a short time ago, she had lost everything she had worked for. She had walked home that day feeling hopeless and lost, wondering what she would do next. But now she was here, being honored for her work that was saving lives in ways she had never imagined. After the event, many people came up to her to shake her hand and share their appreciation. Doctors and nurses told her how much the Carter Initiative was helping them. Hospital administrators admitted that they were rethinking their policies. Some even promised to implement her program in their facilities immediately. Emily listened to every word, her heart filled with joy. This was more than just a new job. This was her purpose. Later that evening, James found her sitting on a quiet balcony, looking out at the city lights. He took a seat beside her and smiled. You did something incredible today, Emily, he said. She turned to him and shook her head with a small laugh. I still can't believe this is happening. A few weeks ago, I thought my career was over. I thought my life was falling apart. James nodded. Sometimes life pushes us in directions we don't expect. You lost one job, but you found something far greater. You're changing the world, Emily. She sighed, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. I never wanted awards or recognition, she admitted. I just wanted to help people. And that's exactly why you deserve all of this, James said. The best people never do it for the praise. They do it because they care. Emily smiled, realizing that he was right. She had never sought attention. She had only followed her heart. And in doing so, she had found something even better than she had ever dreamed of. A few days later, Emily received another surprise. As she was working in her office at the foundation, an assistant walked in and handed her an envelope. "This came for you," she said with a smile. Emily opened it and gasped. Inside was an official letter from the state's medical board. Not only did it acknowledge her contributions to healthcare, but it also included a formal apology from the hospital that had fired her. They admitted that they had made a mistake. And more importantly, they were offering her job back, along with a promotion. Emily stared at the letter, her emotions swirling. The offer was tempting. The hospital had been her home for so long, and now they were finally recognizing her worth. But as she looked around her office at the foundation, she knew her heart had already chosen a new path. She smiled, set the letter aside, and picked up a folder labeled Carter Initiative Expansion Plan. She wasn't going back. She was moving forward, toward something even greater.